Can we add anything to Hashem's infinite brachas? This is, in a sense, a follow-on from the previous sikha that we learned. It's based on the same pasuk. On the pasuk that says, Hashem Elokei Avoseichem Yosef Elohim Kochem Elef Yomim, when Moshe tells the Yidden that Hashem, the God of your fathers, will add to your brachas and add to your quantity 1,000 times over, Vivarech Eschem Kasher Diber Elochem, and He will bless you as He has said so. Isa b'Medrash. So the Medrash says, Amru Lo Yisrael, the Yidden said to Moshe Rabbeinu Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lo Nasan Kitzvah L'Birchaseinu. Hashem did not put any limits on the brachas that He gave us. And you say only 1,000 times growth. To which Moshe replies, what I blessed you, that's my bracha. When the Eibishter comes, in other words, in the future, in the time of Mashiach, probably, then Hashem will bless you as He said He'd bless you, which is bracha she'ein lo kitzvah, a bracha without any limits as well. So many of the commentaries ask a very obvious question, which is, seeing as the Eibishter already blessed us with an unlimited blessing, what is Moshe possibly adding to infinity by saying Yosef that the Eibishter is going to bless you 1,000-fold? Surely that bracha is already included, and completely overwhelmed and insignificant compared to Hashem's infinite brachas. If we say, according to the Gemara, that when you have 200 zuz, 200 coins, it automatically includes 100, well then certainly infinity automatically includes 1,000 times. So what's Moshe adding to Hashem's infinite bracha? So there are certain suggestions by the Mefarshim. HaMefarshim Biru, the commentaries try to explain that possibly the advantage of Moshe's bracha is that the Eibishter's infinite brachas are only available to the Jewish people when we're doing Torah mitzvahs. What Moshe adds is a bracha that has no prerequisites. And that Devorim that would also make sense, that would fit very well with the Gemara's commentary on a pasuk from Sefer Hosea, which seems to be self-contradictory, because it starts off by saying V'hoya mispar b'nei Yisrael gomer, that the number of the Jewish people will be X, and then it says Asher lo yumad v'lo yisafer, which can't be measured and can't be counted. So that's a contradiction. Is it a number or can it not be counted? Says the Gemara. Kan, when do we say that the Yidden won't be counted or measured? When the Yidden do what the Eibishter wants. Kan, when is there a number? When we don't fulfill Hashem's will. In other words, the Gemara is implying that the concept of a finite bracha is always available, even when we're not exactly doing everything that the Eibishter wants. Whereas the Eibishter's bracha, which is completely infinite, that is only available when we're fulfilling Hashem's will. So maybe that's the answer. Or there's another perspective. Moshe is blessing us with a finite bracha for now. And the Eibishter's infinite brachas will become available in the future when Mashiach comes. That actually work well with the language of the Medrash, which says, in our world the brachas have limits, but in the future, in other words in the time of Mashiach, the Jews will exponentially grow and explode like the sand of the sea that cannot be counted. Okay, so that's what it sounds like. Maybe those are the answers. Moshe versus Hashem is whether we deserve it or not, or either now or later. But when you really look at the Medrash Rabbah commenting on our parsha, mashma, the way that the Medrash implies it indicates the difference between the bracha that Moshe gives and the bracha that Hashem gives is only one thing. That the one bracha is Moshe's bracha, and the other is the Eibishter's bracha. But the implication is that they both happen simultaneously. In other words, that implies that even at the same time that Hashem's infinite bracha affects and impacts us, still, even while we have the infinite bracha, there is still room and value for Moshe's finite bracha, and we really have to understand why, because that doesn't seem to make sense. That's according to the Medrash. Yesera mizoi, this is even more the case. When you look at Rashi's commentary on the pasuk, it seems that Rashi is definitely saying that the two kinds of bracha happen simultaneously. Because Rashi quotes the words of the Medrash without giving any further explanation about how we reconcile the apparent contradiction between a finite bracha from Moshe and an infinite bracha from Hashem. Which implies that, according to the simplest understanding of the pasuk, that's what it means, that the two brachas occur simultaneously. That actually does seem to fit with the simple understanding of that pasuk in Hosea. There's a number of the Jewish people, and in the same pasuk, which can't be measured or counted. When you read that pasuk at face value, you don't imagine that it's talking about two different periods. And a mispa b'nei Yisrael, rather the pasuk is indicating that there's a concept of the number, a finite number of Jews, and that occurs at the same time as the bracha of being beyond number. So we've got to understand, first of all, what value could there be to a finite bracha when you already have an infinite bracha, and why would they both occur simultaneously, as if each one has a role to play that the other almost doesn't fulfill. So, al derech inyan anal, similarly, when we're now comparing Moshe to Hashem's brachas, let's look at Hashem's bracha itself. We're arguing that according to the Medrash, and certainly according to Rashi, Moshe's bracha is not completely neutralized because of Hashem's infinite bracha. On Umoitzim Gam, we'll find that in the wording of this bracha, Gam b'birchas Hashem goymer Yosef Aleichem Gufa goymer, this same pasuk that says, "May Hashem add to you as He has said," also implies two different kind of brachas simultaneously. As the Medrash says, listen to what the Medrash says. Yosef Aleichem kochem chulei. The Medrash says, why does it use the word Yosef to add? Loma berchem l'shem tesefes. Why is this specific? Should have just said Hashem will bless you. Why does it say He will add bracha? Says the Medrash, because when the Eibishter adds a bracha, the addition is far greater than the principal original bracha. Or maybe and then it brings various illustrations of how this exactly works. Now that seems completely irrational. It doesn't seem to make any sense. Let's follow this through. If the additional bracha is greater than the original bracha, then why does the Torah, which is absolutely true, call the original bracha the primary bracha if it's the smaller? When you consider that the original bracha is less than the additional bracha, surely that makes it a secondary bracha. Logically, if that's the 90% bracha and this is the 10% bracha, whatever the particular thing is, surely the one that is the bigger bracha must be the main bracha. So actually that pasuk then proves to us that even though it's 100% true that what Hashem adds to the bracha is greater than what He delivered in the original bracha, that does not cancel the original bracha or diminish the original bracha. To the contrary, even though there's more to come, the original bracha is still called the primary bracha, and we need to understand why that is or how that is. How is the finite the ikar and the infinite secondary? Doesn't seem to make sense. So let's go back to what the Gemara said about that pasuk in Hosea and examine it in greater detail, because it will help us to understand what's going on over here. The Gemara told us, when the pasuk says lo yimad v'lo yisafer, that it's impossible to measure or count the Jewish people, that is, as long as the Jews are fulfilling Hashem's will. But when there's a finite number of Jews, of brachas, that's when the Jews are not fulfilling Hashem's will. Let's understand this principle better. Is it not fair to say, as an axiom, that when do we get brachas? When we're doing what Hashem wants. So how do you suggest that there's a bracha that comes when you're not doing what Hashem wants? Isn't the whole thing of brachas that they come when you're doing what Hashem wants? It's a result of doing what Hashem wants. So therefore we have to conclude that when there is a finite bracha in this pasuk, it is that the Jews will have a certain number, which is quite similar to Moshe's bracha, which has a finite amount associated with it. Even though it's a mega amount, it's still finite, 1,000 times. That has to be tluya b'avodas b'nei Yisrael. It has to be a result of some kind of avodah that we did that earned us that bracha. The only thing is, it must be an avodah. We are doing what Hashem wants, just not as perfectly as we should. So we're fulfilling, we're checking the boxes, and we're not yet doing what Hashem wants. We're discharging our responsibility rather than doing what Hashem wants from us. Here's an example. Let's remember the famous story of Cain and Hevel. Cain brought an offering to Hashem. Is that avodah? Yes, it is. Not only did he bring a korban, he was actually the first person to initiate. He came up with the idea of bringing an offering to Hashem. And only after that, Hevel said, oh, you know what, good idea. I'm also, secondary, right, going to do what you've done. So what did Cain miss? What he presented in his offering to Hashem was the cheap product that he had available. So, in the same way as Cain served Hashem, but not nearly as well as he should have. So, in a similar vein, although we're talking at a far higher level than what Cain did, so Kamuran, as you can understand, any time that a person serves Hashem, but with limits, seeing as the person keeps their avodas Hashem very finite, very by the book, doing exactly what is expected of me and no more. Such avodas Hashem gets you chelek in olam haba, gets you rewards, brachos, whatever you want, but it doesn't bring down Hashem's ratzon, which is fundamentally beyond limitations. So you can't bring Hashem's infinite ratzon into the world with an avodah that is finite, measured, calculated. Now there's another way that we could look at these two perspectives, doing what Hashem wants by the book and doing what Hashem wants beyond. These two concepts, mispar, the finite type of avodah or brocha, and the infinite, absolute, superlative avodah and brocha, but can even define that at an even higher level. Rabbi Alter explains, when a person serves Hashem in the best way possible, it's still mispar, it could still be finite, because that would be a description of somebody who is fulfilling all the mitzvahs in the best way possible. Mitzvahs are presented in a finite way. That is the design of mitzvahs. They're intended to have finite parameters. 613 mitzvahs. You can't add to those mitzvahs or subtract from those mitzvahs. And the truth is, every mitzvah has its parameters. When you do it, who has to do it, how you do it. So that's the avodah of mitzvahs. But the concept of not measuring and not counting, that says Alter Rebbe that refers to how we serve Hashem through doing tshuva, because because tshuva is something which is completely beyond the system. It's completely beyond the spiritual hierarchies. It's completely beyond anything that could be measured. So it's possible that you could have an imperfect avodah versus a perfect avodah, or even a perfect avodah within the realm of existing Torah mitzvahs versus tshuva, which is completely out of the ballpark. Now that we understand that there are these two possibilities of how we serve Hashem, and bearing in mind that any bracha that we get will be dependent on how we serve Hashem, let's go back to the psukim about the so-called finite or infinite brachas. We already said, the simple understanding of the pasuk in Hosea, that the number of the Jewish people will be beyond number. The simple understanding is that it's not two separate concepts applying at two different times. Rather, it means that there's a number that is so big that it's like you can't count it. For example, grains of sand They have a number, but the number is so big you can't count the number. Using that same principle, let's now apply it to the two possible ways that we could serve Hashem. The finite way of serving Hashem and the superlative way of serving Hashem. Even when we're serving Hashem in the finite way, Torah and mitzvahs, which have their specific times, dates, ways that you fulfill them, requirements, who it belongs to, etc. That has embedded within it an infinite nature, a lo yisafer element. Meaning, even though mitzvahs have a specific number, time, and set of parameters, every mitzvah that we do stimulates doing Hashem's ratzon, which means that every mitzvah that we do, even though it's within a very specific set of rules, brings into the world Hashem's ratzon, which is completely beyond any rules, beyond any parameters. Just to understand what's the difference between these two types of avodah. When we do a mitzvah, a person puts on tefillin. Does that person bring godliness into the world? Yes. Do they see it? No. Because tefillin are specific boxes that are specific size with specific materials placed on your arm in a specific way. So it all lives in the world of the finite parameters, so you don't see the infinite. Whereas when a person does tshuva, when you watch the person doing tshuva, you can see clearly that they're serving Hashem in a way that has no restrictions, no limits. There you can see clearly the infinite nature of the mitzvah, the infinite nature of our service of Hashem, the ratzon, the supernal wisdom, will of Hashem being exposed and experienced through that particular avodah. Just to explain that a little bit better. Inside every mitzvah, what is the definition of a mitzvah? This is what the Eibishter wants. And just like Hashem obviously is completely beyond any definition, parameters, or limitations, so anything that Hashem wills has no parameters, limitations, or boundaries. Therefore, every time we do a mitzvah, which is Hashem's will, that brings down into our reality, it brings into our reality Hashem, a taste of Hashem's will that has no limits. Now, that's not our experience, right? We experience the mitzvah that you only do at this time, in this particular day, in this particular way. The fact that mitzvahs have their limits. That's not like there's some absolute external set of limits that are placed on Hashem's mitzvah. It is a so-called self-imposed set of restrictions that David applies to himself. That David chose that the only way to be able to access this tremendous infinite energy is through this mitzvah performed in this way by these people at that time. An amazing thing is not only has the Eibishter defined how it should look, what it should be, what the Eibishter did is created the possibility to contain, to grab, to hold that tremendous energy. Okay, so let's understand this in the language of Chassidus. So, the fact that tefillin are black cubes that you make out of leather and you wrap around your left arm only on weekdays and only in the mornings and only for a certain amount of time is not because time or space or color or material limits Hashem. Like for us, for example, if we were to do something, you want to cook a meal, these are the ingredients you could use. You can't mix those ingredients, it doesn't make sense. David doesn't have those problems. And is that the Eibishter chose to present himself in this particular finite way to us, called tefillin. Chassidus calls us self-imposed limitations. Any self-imposed limitation is not a true limitation. If I choose I'm going to speak in a way that is palatable to the audience that I'd like to speak to, that doesn't limit me, it just makes me appropriate. Yet on the other hand, there's a very important need for this kind of set of parameters, limitations, time, space, reality. Because where's the mitzvah going to play out in the world? What is the world? A place of finite borders. And it's incapable of tolerating an infinite experience. If the Eibishter would share infinite self with us, we'd disappear. And seeing as the design of Judaism is that Torah mitzvahs has to play out in the physical realities of the world, so therefore the only way to do that is to create parameters that will contain Torah mitzvahs so that they're accessible, so they can be performed in this world by people like you and I. That's actually the meaning of the pasuk. There will be a number, there will be a finite reality, which is beyond counting and beyond measure. In other words, what's the pasuk telling us? The fact that mitzvahs have numbers, times, limits, sizes, dimensions is not a true set of limitations. Because actually all of those mitzvahs are just conduits for infinite divine radiation. There's only one question, and it's a big question. It's not a question on the parasha, it's a question on the whole philosophy of Yiddishkeit. Considering that the goal of all mitzvahs is what? The objective of mitzvahs is to bring infinite divine light down. Okay, so why did they design it in this way? If the whole point is to bring and reveal infinite divine energy, why did they wish to create the stage on this world, which is a place that can't tolerate that infinite divine energy? It sounds unfair. Do this in a world that can't handle it. And that's why you have to now have all the limits and times and measures, etc., in order to create a way that mitzvahs can actually perform in this world. Why? Why do you do it that way? There's a very deep and important explanation. Why did they give us mitzvahs to perform in the lowest physical reality and with all the restrictions of that reality? It's not because the unfortunately we have to be able to package this godliness for this world, and unfortunately the world happens to be limited, so the only way to package it is in a limited fashion, because we are not capable of receiving, accepting, absorbing infinite divine light unless it's first packaged in bite-sized pieces called mitzvahs. That's not why. It's not because, unfortunately, the environment can't tolerate the godliness. That's not why the Eibishter designed it this way. Why did he design it this way? Because the ultimate state is the ultimate is not to have infinite, that which is beyond measure, that which is beyond number, that which is beyond definition, and stop there. The ultimate is to be able to synthesize the infinite and the finite. That the world of finite realities should be elevated to experience and be one with the infinite reality. And it's only when you synthesize what seems to be absolutely impossible to synthesize, infinite and finite, that's when you touch and experience and express the Eibishter's essence, which is completely beyond any rules, the rules of finite and the rules of infinite. Therefore, the only way that this could ever be affected is by the Eibishter having the so-called self-imposed set of parameters. If we were to interact with any experience of divine revelation, from the highest all the way to the most accessible, from that reality, In all the spiritual realities, finite and infinite are separate and possibly even contradictory. But specifically, when you get to the reality of Eibishter's essence, beyond finite and infinite, then Eibishter is capable of bringing the two together. And that's very simple, similar to the concept that we have, of course, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the holiest part of the Beis HaMikdash, where the Aron both occupied and didn't occupy space simultaneously. The Torah insists that the Aron has to be measurable. 2.5 amas long, 1.5 amas wide, 1.5 amas high. And yet at the same time, it doesn't occupy any space. It doesn't follow any of the rules of dimensions. That's the goal, the fusing of finite and infinite. And now you can understand why it is that even when Eibush is giving an infinite bracha to the Jewish people, Moshe's bracha, which seems quite finite, only 1,000 times, is still relevant and still valuable. Because the goal is not to blast away all the finite elements of this world. So Moshe gives a finite bracha. The goal is not to overwhelm that with Hashem's infinite bracha. The goal is to synthesize the Eibishter's infinite bracha with Moshe's finite bracha. Therefore, Moshe's bracha of 1,000-fold increase remains viable and valuable. What does Moshe's bracha achieve? It attacks the finite world and stretches it to the nth degree of what the finite world could become. 1,000 times is almost like the maximum increase that the finite world could imagine. But later what's going to happen in the time of Mashiach, when the Eibishter is going to reveal his infinite bracha, that will bring Hashem's infinite bracha into the finite reality. That the world will not only be stretched to the limits of what the world can handle, even in its most crazy imagination, but within the world you'll have something which is truly infinite. This will also give us a very interesting insight into something the Frierdiker Rebbe said. Rabbi said frequently that the Rebbe Rashab would always add a word to the wording of the very famous Medrash Tanchuma Pashas Nosei, which says that the Eibishter desired to have a home in the lowest possible dimension. So the Rebbe Rashab would add as Ateva Yizbarech Yizbarech dir b'sachtonim. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, why did the Rebbe Rashab stick in the word Yizbarech, which is not there in the Medrash? It really needs to be explained. Yes, of course, when you mention the Eibishter's name, it should be with an accolade. But you don't typically find that when the Rabbeim would quote Midrashim or Gemaras that happen to refer to Hashem, that they would add an accolade like blessed be he, etc. So why here? It must be that there's a specific, unique connection between what the word Yisbarech represents with regards to Hashem, with the principle of the fact that David desired this dwelling place in the lowest realm. What's the connection? The idea of a home for Hashem in our world is something that requires two completely opposite realities. When you speak about a home, that represents that this is going to be the Eibishter's essence revealed without any inhibitions. Which is exactly like our homes. In your home, you could be yourself. You don't have to conform to anybody else's expectations, no inhibitions. So Dira means absolute essence of Hashem on the one hand, one extreme. Yet when you describe tachtonim, the lowest realms, that's our physical world. You don't get lower or more finite than this. Tachlis agvul. This is the ultimate finite reality. And to have Hashem's home in this world is the synthesis of the ultimate infinite with the ultimate finite, which is the goal of Judaism. How do you do that? How is it possible to imagine that our tiny, finite, claustrophobic world should become the accommodation of Hashem's infinite essence? Without the world being blown to smithereens? One word will explain that. What the Rebbe Rashab added, that word Yisborech. That apparent contradiction between this world being Hashem's home for Hashem's essence, you can understand by knowing that it's Hashem Yisborech, which is the meaning of the word brocha. So if we analyze what a brocha is, we can understand how this all works. What's a brocha? We know very well from other places in Chassidus that the big difference between prayer and brocha is that a brocha means that the energy already exists, and now there's somebody who's powerful enough to reach into the root of that energy and bring it down into our reality. That's called a brocha. It already exists. Can't give a brocha that isn't already there. Whereas davening has the capacity to stimulate a new energy that was never there before. Yehi Ratzon, as we say in our davening. Let it now become your will, implying it wasn't originally your will. Wasn't the original plan. Inyan Chodosh, something brand new, which does not exist even at the highest spiritual realms. Big difference. So brachas are guaranteed because the package is already there. It just needs to be delivered. Davening is, so to speak, high risk because you don't know if you'll get it, but if you get it, you'll get something that was never there before. That's in the human experience. That's if it's a bracha given by a human being. The bracha, a human, no matter how great they are, koya and tzaddik, whatever it is, can only give a bracha from what already exists. But when it's Hashem's bracha, seeing as they are certainly not restricted by Medidus Vagbodas to Shirish Hanivram Izborech. The Eibush is certainly not limited by the reservoirs or sources of bracha that the recipient may be lined up to get. The Eibish's brachas have both values: the bracha guarantee and the tefillah innovation. Hashem's bracha can stimulate, can generate something brand new, which is beyond not just the recipient, but the source of all energy for that recipient. In other words, when we discuss a divine bracha, we have two extremes playing together. On the one hand, the bracha reaches higher than the root source of the created reality, beyond the entire spiritual hierarchy of everything that exists in created realities. On the one hand, so the highest high, and yet it can deliver that highest high to the lowest low. Bracha v'hamshocha. Bracha means to draw something down, to bring it down into the lower world. To bring something that is fundamentally beyond the scope of creation into the reality of a specific element of creation. The complete paradox, the highest high, which should be beyond our reach, into our lap. Now you understand why the Rebbe Rashab adds to the Medrash that who wanted to have the Rebbe Tachtonim? He Yisborech. The fact that it is possible for our lowly world to be transformed into this home for His essence is only something we can understand when we appreciate the nature of Hashem's bracha, which causes Hashem to be not just God, but the Yisborech, who brings it down into our reality. Hainu, in other words, To draw something which is completely beyond the system into the lowest part of the system. Now that's still not absolutely clear. Okay, so now we've got it clearly, right? The only way you can ever synthesize the ultimate infinite with the ultimate finite is if the Eibishter is doing it. So why is that something that we have to stimulate? We've got to do avodah, and then we'll get that bracha. How? What do we got to do with it? Surely any avodah that we do will certainly have its limitations because we're finite beings. Surely all that we will ever be able to access is finite energy and finite light. We can't get to that place of Dir Eloi Yisbarech, of this absolute essence of Hashem, which is beyond the scope of everything. So the answer to that, as Chassidus explains extensively, is who we know very well that what the Eibishter wanted is that whatever is revealed from on high should never be the so-called bread of shame, freebies, handouts. The Eibishter wants us to earn our keep, because then we feel dignified and we feel part of it and we absorb and own the experience in a meaningful way. Therefore, whatever is drawn down from the higher realms, even if it's coming from a realm that is completely beyond the scope of the stretch of a created reality, still they'll still link back to our efforts. In simple language, the reality is, how will our world transform into Hashem's abode? That's going to be the Eibishter's gift to us, because we cannot do it. We cannot synthesize infinite and finite. It's not possible for us. Yet, as the Gemara tells us, the Gemara tells us that the nature of a person is, when you give somebody a gift, when they've done something that makes you feel, I want to give them something. We've given some nachas, in a sense, to he who will provide the gift. And then the Eibishter gives the gift. In practical terms, that means the first step is, we as beings of Hashem's created reality have to serve Hashem to the best of our ability. When we reach the ceiling of our abilities, of our commitment, of our efforts, then the Eibishter can switch on his gifts from on high. Incidentally, this also explains the concept of Brechas Kohanim. When the Kohanim get up, they bless us as Hashem's proxy. In other words, they give bracha d'lamayla mishtalshelus. They're the conduit for a bracha that is completely beyond the world. Now, let's think about this logically. The Eibishter wants to bless us. So why does it have to come via the Kohanim? That they should be the Eibishter's proxy to bless us. The Eibishter could just bless us and that's it. But that takes us right back to this principle we've just learned. The Eibishter's intention is that even the greatest, most powerful, most infinite brachos that are completely beyond the structures of our reality, they have to be accessed. How? Through human endeavor and human input. That leaves us with a message. Even though the Eibishter's brachos are, in a sense, so to speak, in our hands, you take that bracha that Moshe gave, and that bracha of Moshe says, let's take you to the 1000th degree, which is basically take you to the optimum of what you could achieve. It's that effort, our growth, our avodah, our hitting our goals, that actually, so to speak, complements and completes the Eibishter's infinite bracha, that it won't be a freebie handout. And that helps us to understand what we said. It doesn't seem to make sense. If what the Eibishter adds is more than what he gave in the principle, surely that should be that should be the principle. Now we understand it. How do we generate the Eibishter's infinite bracha in our reality? Through our avodah. That's what we're actually, our input, and the bracha generated by our input is actually called the mainstay of what life is all about. Because it is only as a result of our avodah that great infinite bracha from Hashem is going to flow. So, this is also one of the amazing insights that Rashi alludes to. The Rashi does quote partially from the Sifri and the Medrash about how the Jews said to Moshe, why are you limiting our brachas? And then you get Rashi's pshat. Rashi's pshat is that at the end of the day, the Yidden said to Moshe, like, you're limiting our brachas, and he says, don't worry, that's Mishali, and there's more coming from the Eibishter. There's one big difference between the wording that Rashi uses compared to the Medrash and the Sifri. He says, what does it mean when Hashem says the bracha that he had promised? Unlike the Medrash that says that it's the promise that you'll be like the sand or like the stars, etc. Rashi says it's the bracha that just as it is impossible to count, so you will be impossible to count. What's Rashi alluding to? Rashi is alluding to the concept of mimona, that which can't be limited, counted, defined, etc. When is that going to be? Rashi says, look at Unkelos, who says, that is in the future when the Jews, so to speak, inherit the world, which is what? Inherit the world. When we transform the world into the place that the Eibishter wants it, then we get that bracha from Hashem, which is lo yimad v'lo yisafer. It's completely beyond anything that we could imagine, let alone achieve. And that will be the Asid Lava in the time of Mashiach as a direct result of our efforts, that we did our avodah to the max, and therefore the Eibishter gives us brachas and gives us dirah b'sachtonim, which we could never imagine, and that should happen in Mitzvah Hashem sooner than any of us could imagine possible.